Welcome to the SciComm workshop at PBE 2021. My name is Isabel Mendoza. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the Global Plan Council, and I will act as the facilitator for this session. I will be also responsible for selecting the questions for our speaker today. Speaking of which, let me introduce you to Michele Catanzado, who is the leader for this hands-on training. Michele is a journalist based in Barcelona, Spain. However, you might be surprised to learn that he has, in fact, a background in science. He has a PhD in physics on complex network theory. He has worked since 2001. He has worked since 2001 as a freelance journalist, writing mainly about science, environment, health, technology, science policy, and academic freedom. His working languages are many: English, Spanish, Italian, and Catalan. He has written for many media, including Nature, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, Der Spiegel, The Guardian, La Repubblica. In fact, his work as a journalist has been recognized with multiple prizes. And lucky for us, he regularly gives lessons and workshops in science communication. Michele, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Isabel. Welcome to this. Thanks, Isabel, again, and welcome to these workshops. And thanks to the GPC for having me. Okay, so since it's afternoon and siesta time, let's say, for a lot of people, I will try to start with something strong. And moreover, since I'm a journalist, it will be something, let's say, a bit shocking. So a title, which is Science Communication, It Kills, It Saves Lives. So joking apart, now I will give you two examples of why you should care, of why scientists, scholars, PhD students, postdocs, etc., should care about science communication. The first example talks about two homicides. So if any of you feel that he or she may be affected by it, just turn off for 2 minutes. And then I have another example that is less shocking, let's say. Okay, so the first one is this one. Okay, so these two scholars, a biotechnologist and a chemist from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, they were actually killed in the campus of that university. And that the homicides were claimed by an organization called Individuals Standing Towards the Wild, ITS, that has made many different actions. This is something I've covered for Nature. This is a plot that a map that appeared in Nature of many of the actions they've carried out. And I'm telling you this story because in the claims they post on the internet, they literally quote articles from the popular science press, like, for example, or the press, or for example, from science popularization book like Wired, this book by Ray Kurzweil, which is this bearded guy that works at Google, Engines of Creation, which is one of the first science popularization book about nanotechnology, etc. And all these ways of portraying science are often tagged with the word transhumanism. They claim that biotechnology, nanotechnology, genetics, etc., GMOs, etc., they are sort of pushing us towards a tipping point in which humanity will somehow become independent of natural rules, etc. So anybody that has a direct knowledge of science knows that this narrative is a bit hyped, exaggerated, but they believe it literally, and let's say they bring it up to the point of really, killing scientists. So I'm telling this story. It's something I also covered for The Guardian, because usually there is a naive view of science communication as something that is sort of external to science, as something that is anecdotal, that is, something that you don't need to care about to be a good scientist. But this is a sort of very tragic proof that, in fact, the way in which science is portrayed in the public can really have a very strong dramatic impact on science. So let's go to another example, which is a bit more, let's say, positive. maybe you know this guy. He's called Andrew Wakefield, and he published a famous paper in Lancet in which he claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism. This resulted, or at least was correlated in the UK with a strong drop in vaccines, in MMR vaccines, up to a moment in which not a scientist, but a journalist, a freelance journalist, Brian Deere, published a long investigation, by the way, a book telling the story of this whole investigation was published last year by Brian Deere. And he basically discovered two things. First of all, that Andrew Wakefield had cherry-picked data. So he had basically selected stories that confirmed this supposed or theoretical link between MMR and autism. And secondly, that he had a strong conflict of interest because he was advising lawyers that sued pharmaceutical companies that produced vaccines with the argument that they had caused autism. And in the end, after many years and after a lot of resistance from the scientific community, the paper was retracted. So this is another example of the fact that what happens in the world of science communication has a strong impact on scientists. And it's very good that you have joined this workshop because it's good that scientists care for science communication. I think there is a naive view of the relation between science and journalism and communication in general, in which basically there is only the arrow, the top arrow, not the one at the bottom, in which, you know, science is basically something that is done in the lab, and then it is thrown to the journalist that must metabolize it, amplify it, and translate it for the public. But these examples, and one more that I will give you before going into the more practical aspect of the talk, is that at least one must take into account that there is a feedback loop, that what happens in the world of communication has a strong impact on science. And one last, let's say, proof or at least evidence that this is true is this very famous paper in which basically it was found that the New York Times had an impact factor. What do I mean? It means that, this study found that journal articles, so scientific articles that were reported in the New York Times had an extra amount of citations, okay? So, and they could really prove that it was not a simple correlation. There was a causal relation because, I mean, I can tell you later, they took advantage of a situation in which the newspaper wasn't out because of a strike, but it was still published, and the effect disappeared when the newspaper was out. So it was really the extra visibility in the press what caused these extra citations. So a core mechanism of science, like, you know, citing papers, is influenced by something that in principle is outside science. So the fact that journalists in the New York Times pick a story, one story or another one. So I hope this short introduction basically conveys the idea that you are not here only for, let's say, you know, something that is an addition to your basic work as a scientist. It's something that you must really take into account as part of your job as scientists. And this does not mean that you have to transform yourself into journalists, into communicators. Fortunately, you have a lot of very good, well-experienced professional figures at your side, like, for example, Isabel. But it's very important to be open and ready to communication. So what we will do next is basically, I will finish in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, a short introduction that is very practical on what makes for a good science story, a good science news. And then we will do 3 exercises, which will basically be reading a press release. We will share the press release with you. I will give you a checklist just to help you, but you don't need really to go through it in every single detail, but it's just, you know, a guide for reading. And then we will comment together on these press releases to see what was good about them, what was bad about them, whether the content was newsworthy or not, whether the structure, the way in which the press release was built was adequate or not, etc. And I hope that throughout this process of going through these examples, it's not that you become an expert press officer, which is not the point, but you sort of can go through the mental process of how a good communication is built, okay? And also take into account that many of the principles that I will, and strategies and techniques and ideas that I will talk about are not only applied to press releases, but are applied to all sorts of communications ranging from, you know, a podcast, a documentary, a newspaper article, etc. Although, of course, each one of them has some specific features. So what makes for a news? Okay, this is a basic question. There is no universal answer, but I have tried to put together some of the quick questions that journalists, for example, ask themselves when they start to think whether a story could make for a news or not. So the big questions are, is it new? Is it important? So what? And how solid is it? Okay? Is it new? The easiest way, let's say, of answering to this question is formulating it in another way, which is, why are you writing it now? Okay? So if you really want to tell a story about, you know, something that is very well established, Mendel inheritance or whatever, that is popularization, but that is not news, okay? Because there is not an easy answer to this question, that is, why are you telling this me now, okay? So a key aspect of newsworthiness is, as the words say, the fact that something is novel, okay, that is new, okay? The second big question is it important, okay? And here, there is a very important thing to bear in mind. Is it important for my readership, not for me? Something that can be very relevant for the scientific community, for experts in a certain field, etc., and completely irrelevant for the general public. But for example, if you are writing, so for example, something can be completely irrelevant and so newsworthy if you are targeting, for example, the readers of general newspapers, but it can be newsworthy, for example, if you are writing for, you know, the news and specialized newsletters for people that are in, you know, plant genetics, okay? So is it important? Always means, is it important for my readership, okay? I insist on this because scientists tend to give a big priority to what is important in their field and according to scientific criteria, etc. But you really have to try to make an effort to put yourself in the mind of a reader. Something that is a very important methodological advance in your field that maybe will change your life, your everyday life, may be completely irrelevant for somebody that is not in your field and in your area, or not, who knows. You know, for example, CRISPR, it's very technical, etc., but it is newsworthy because it has a lot of potential implications for the general public, okay? So some ways of pinning down whether something is important is asking yourself, who is my target? Is it a layperson or an expert, for example? Or a spatial question, that is this information somehow close to my reader? For example, is it something that has been done, imagine a research on a plant that is endemic in a very specific place, probably is relevant for the readership of that place, or a research carried out by researchers of a country is relevant for the readers of that country. And then there is a question of time, that is, how important is the story at this point of time? Here I have an anecdote. Shortly after the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, I interviewed a researcher, which was an obscure researcher in Barcelona. And a few months before, she had asked money to carry out, to build a prototype of an antigen test for viruses in bats. And when this was submitted, obviously people said, what a strange thing, you know, an antigen test for viruses in bats. Obviously, when coronavirus appeared, this became very important, and suddenly she received a lot of money. And of course, it became very newsworthy because something that was not in the public sphere before, suddenly it became a key element of the public sphere. The other important question is, so what? Okay, so once we have decided whether the news is a novelty and whether it is important for my readership, what is the implication of that finding, of that story, of that report, etc.? Does it have impacts in health, environment, technology, industry, economy, but also, for example, in governance, in terms of what does it imply in terms of policy, or for example, also in culture, in the way we see the world, or in ethics, or in everyday life, which is, I think, in the case of people doing research on plants, is one of the strong aspects. You know, plants of all sorts, edible or not, are our companions all the time. Another way of approaching this so what question is looking at the past. So how does it change things? What problem of the past does it solve, or what problem that was not there in the past does it pose? Looking at the future, that is, what future event can be expected based on this finding, on this result, on this story, on this report, and also actions, that is, what actions should be taken, should be done based on this finding. And then one last question to assess newsworthiness is the actual scientific value of the story. So for this can be addressed through many different angles. Some of them are, for example, the reputation of the author, how expert they are, at what stage is the research, whether it's pre-reviewed, it's preprint, in case of clinical trials, what is the phase, etc. How strong is the evidence? Is the statistic good? Could it be reproduced, at least in principle? A very important thing, is the evidence correlation or causation? And also the limits. This is very, very important. That is, usually we tend to hype and we tend to put the focus on what the story explains, but it has almost it is equally important to put the focus on what the story does not explain. What are the open questions? What are the things that are still unaddressed? Okay. So later I will send you a checklist, and this will be the, let's say, the basically key core part of the checklist, that is asking these 4 questions and answering them. You can really assess whether something is newsworthy or not. After that, I would like to go through quickly some features of effective writing. And basically, I will start with the very broad, structural ways of arraying information in a way that is comprehensible and appealing. And then I will go in more and more into the details, going down to the structure of single sentences and even individual words in the next 10 minutes. So first of all, this is an old rule, but it is a golden one, the inverted pyramids. When you write a paper, you usually start with the background, with the premises, etc., and then you go to the results, okay? When you start a story for the general public, 99% of the times, the best strategy is, let's say, turning around this pyramid, start with the results, tell what's new, tell what's important, and then you will have plenty of time to explain the background and how the thing was made, etc. Okay? So sometimes when I do more complex exercises, I tell people, okay, you have identified that you want to communicate, say, 5 or 6 ideas, which is a lot. Array them from the more interesting, the newer, the more attractive, to the less interesting, the less new, the less attractive, and basically 99% of the job will be done, okay? In terms of building the structure of your press release. If you have a doubt on whether you have to put one information above or below in a press release, in a story, in a script, etc. Ask the key question of which one is more appealing, more attractive, more interesting, newer, etc., and put it above, okay? Then this is the typical structure of a story, a newspaper story, a press release, etc. You have a headline, subheads, and a lead. Headline and subheads is self-explanatory. What is a lead? The lead is a very important element of any written text, including scripts for podcasts or videos, etc., which is basically the first words that you communicate to the public. So there is highlighted material, which is the headline and the subheads, and then there is what in Latin is called the incipit, so the beginning of your story, okay? In these elements, headline, subhead, and leads, there should be what matters more of your story, the essential information. So a way of pinning down the essential information is this famous 5W plus 1H rule. So what, who, when, where, why, and how. Obviously, you don't need to include all these things, but it's a good exercise to ask these questions in the background of your mind to check whether you have forgotten anything important to put there. And then there is, metaphors for what a lead is are, for example, the trailer of a movie. So in the trailer of a movie, you usually don't understand the whole story of the movie, but you have the real strong highlight and you get the gist of the movie, okay? So a lead should look like the trailer of a movie. Or another metaphor by a journalist called Peter Corrigan is the story of the friend on a hill. So imagine you are running with a very important information to tell to a friend of yours that is on the top of a hill. And when you get to the top of the hill, you only have enough breath to say one sentence. Then that sentence is your lead, okay? So the important thing that you really want to convey, okay? Another important strategy to write effective leads is to pick one topic at a time, okay? Probably you want to tell many different things about your research, about a finding, etc. But it's always good to bet on one important message. Sorry, I am in Rome now and I'm almost melting, so I need to drink some water. And also avoid as much as you can anything that make reading difficult. So a typical mistake that you find, for example, in press releases is starting the press release with researchers at the University of Alabama in collaboration with researchers at the University of Melbourne in with blah, 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 published in this author, blah, 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 and then the finding, okay? By the time you have arrived to the finding, many of the readers will have lost their patience, okay? It's always good to start with the real key message, and then you will have time to tell us who has done it, okay? One important thing is that here I draw the lead as a single paragraph, but it may be a more important one. Then the following paragraphs, a key element that you have to take into account is that at every new paragraph, at every new block in the story, you have, let's say, 50% chance of losing half of your readers, okay? So it's always good to not disappoint them, okay? So a way to keep attention high, for example, is introducing a relevant quote. Regarding the rest of the structure, then it is very important to choose a strategy, how the story is told. Is it a chronological story? Is it a spatial story? Sometimes you don't follow time, you explore spaces. Is it a list? Is it a logical sequence, etc.? And yeah, I will not go into the detail, maybe just remember to avoid abrupt conclusions, okay? Then now that we have explored the structure, let's go to the writing, the actual writing, okay? So a very important message is being clear, being easy, go to the spot, because readers have little time. Think about yourselves as as readers? Is it that you have 24 hours per day to read the news and understand all the nuances, etc.? Usually not, okay? Usually you skim through the titles, the headlines, and you get trapped into a story, and maybe you start to read it, and after a few paragraphs you go to another one, etc. So it's very important to make lives of the readers easy, okay? Which does not mean to treat him or her like a stupid. Usually a good thing to bear in mind is that readers are infinitely intelligent, but they are also infinitely ignorant, okay? So you can convey complex messages, but you have to really explain them from scratch, okay? Accuracy, so being obsessed with facts, etc. And then one very important thing for science communication is that you usually have complex concepts. For example, you have technical words, or you have numbers, data, evidence. All these should be broke down through metaphors, anecdotes, comparisons, etc. So for every, I mean, in general, it's always good to avoid the technical word or to avoid a complex concept. But if you can break it down, if you need to introduce it, then you really need to break it down to find a metaphor, to find some sort of thing that allows to people to get the gist of what's out there. Or for example, in case of numbers, it's how large is a 15,000 square meters building. It's very difficult to imagine unless you say, okay, it's 5 tennis pitches, okay? So how long is a 13,000 kilometer strip? It's difficult, but you can compare it to the distance between London and Tokyo, or to the how many times you go around the Earth, all these sort of things, okay? Then going down to specific words and sentences, it's always good to have short sentences and avoid subordinate clauses, okay? So for example, what is a subordinate clause? Michele Catanzado, comma, who is a science journalist based in Barcelona, comma, is giving a workshop on science communication, okay? It's always good to split it down. For example, Michele Catanzaro is giving a workshop. He is a journalist based in Barcelona, okay? So this is a typical exercise. Once you have written the first version of your story, go through it and eliminate all subordinate clauses. I and we are usually forbidden. Nobody is interested in you. And when you say we, you are bringing your reader into a community in which he or she is not necessarily part of, okay? So unless, I mean, in very special occasion, it is allowed in what is called gonzo journalism, in which there is, you know, a first-person experience, etc. But usually it is forbidden. Adjectives are also red flags. So a lot, a few, big, small, say how many, how big, how small, okay? And present tense and active is always better than past and passive. So for example, is better than was, and for example, a researcher have done this is better than this has been done by researchers, okay? Because passive is more difficult to process in English and in most languages. And then impersonal, it is thought, it has been announced, people say, no, who thinks, who has announced, who says, okay? Quotes are a moment, an opportunity to convey interpretation, even opinion. So not opinion by who writes, which is usually something that doesn't matter, but opinion, for example, by scholars, by scientists. And it is very important to use them when appropriate, okay? So when they convey this interpretation, if a quote is simply a series of facts, then you don't need to quote it. You just state the facts and that's it, okay? And they also have a utility, a sort of aesthetic use, which is breaking down a very complex list of hard facts with something that is more nuanced, more in terms of interpretation, etc. And it also really breaks the, let's say, the sound of the text, introducing a different tone, okay? Words and sentences that don't work. As I said before, technical jargon. So if you have a technical word, avoid it or explain it. Generic expressions. So instead of expert agree that, it's better to say in 2001, the European Environmental Agency showed in this and that report that, okay? Rhetoric sentences and, you know, euphemisms like the company is experiencing challenging in its positioning and will carry out a rationalization. This can be stated in a much clearer way, saying the company is losing money because people don't buy their products, and the company will fire 50 employees, for example. And also cliches like, you know, an alarming report, a serious danger, trendy words, etc. So that's it as an introduction. I will maybe leave a couple of minutes for any question, comments, or remarks. If any, Isabel will convey them to me. Otherwise, we go to the exercise.
Right now, we don't have any questions here in the back end. However, we have a 20-second delay, so maybe they will start coming in a few seconds. But maybe we can start with the exercise. I've shared already the training materials, and I will share the processes whenever you tell me to.
Okay, fine. So feel free to ask questions at any point, okay? And Isabel will be vigilant, and she will interrupt me and pose them to me. I mean, in the real world, in the pre-pandemic world, this would have been done in person, and it will be an open discussion in a room. And so imagine that you are in this situation, and please feel free to interrupt. I mean, this will work if you really engage with the exercise, okay? If it's just me commenting on the press releases, the exercise will not be as effective. I mean, it will be interesting, but you know, it's always better to learn by doing, okay? So what Isabel has shared with you is a checklist, which is basically this presentation that I gave you arrayed as a list, okay? So there are many things there, and it's not something that one sort of learns in matter of minutes. So I don't expect you to answer all the questions. You can also sort of ignore it and sorry, there is a comment on a press release details. Okay, maybe Isabel can address it. But anyway, okay. You can also rely on your intuition instead of going through that checklist. But I thought it was useful to give it to you both for future reference and in case you are in the middle of the exercise and you don't really know what to do, you can sort of try and start to answer those questions, okay? So the first exercise is this press release. I will open it myself and share the screen so that we are sure that we are all on the same page. Why plants panic when it rains, okay? This is the title of the press release. I think now Isabel will share it with you.
Yeah, just one thing, in case you are not able to open the training materials via the Q&A box, I will share them on Twitter under the hashtag PBE2021, okay? So you can find them there as well.
Yeah, I guess I set the sharing in such a way that anybody with the link could access to it. But if it's not so, for some reason I don't understand, just tell me and I will change the sharing settings. Okay, so the exercise is the following. This is a short press release that you can see. I would give you 10 minutes. So in Central European time, from now to 15:45, okay? So it's 15:35 in Central European time up to 15:45 to read it, go through it, maybe try to answer some of the questions. We have have discussed, especially about newsworthiness, about how the story is read. And then we will have a quarter of an hour, more or less, to discuss it together, okay? So I will basically ask you some of these questions contained in the checklist, and anybody who wants to pop in and comment can write it to Isabel, and Isabel will read it aloud and share it with me, okay? And then I will give you also my own analysis, okay? So now, 10 minutes to read it and to jot down your annotations. What do you think about this news? Whether it's about this press release, whether it's newsworthy or not, whether it complies with some of the rules or the, let's say, ideas that I gave you in the previous talk and in the list. Okay. So I will be here all the time in case anybody can want to ask question or has difficulties in the exercise. Okay.
Okay. I will answer for everyone. Under the I will keep sharing the links to the other materials. The training, the checklist is already online, both on the Q&A box and in Twitter under the hashtag PBE2021. And in that particular tweet, I will link below the other press releases that we will be sharing and commenting. So right now you have there available the checklist and the first press release. Michele is taking the lead and sharing and sharing the press release as well here in the screen, the first one. So, Michele, are you going to check the time, or should I check the time?
I'm checking the time.
Ah, perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to comment this one. We have a question from Jesse Forrest. Where are we sharing our thoughts on the article?
So basically, write it down on your, you can make a copy of the file and write it down in that file, or you can jot them down in a paper or in whatever document, and then I will ask your feedback, okay? Mm-hmm. So when I say, for example, do you think this is a novel fact? I will ask some of you. I mean, it's not, there are apparently a lot of people following us, so maybe one or two people can say, okay, I think it's novel for this reason, and if others don't disagree, they can write to Isabel and say, I think it's not novel for that and that reason, and then I discuss the answers, okay? So the exact channel on where you share your talk when I ask your thoughts, when I ask the question, Isabel can say that.
Yeah, you can share them through the Q&A box again, or if you are feeling more creative, you can send us that tweet as well. Use the hashtag PBR and the hashtag SciComm, and then I can track those. Maybe that's another option. So I'm used to multitasking, so don't worry. Okay. So the first comments are coming in through the Q&A.
Yeah, maybe let's wait one more minute and then we go through them so that people have time to finish their work. Okay. Okay, great. So maybe since you have the press release probably open on your computer, I will put my face on so you see a human at least and not letters. And Isabel, what is the feedback by now? And then maybe we go through the main questions. Oh, turn on your mic, please.
So we have 3 comments right now. The first one, it's hard to start a media release. This one seems to start a bit in a boring way. Maybe you can comment on that. If I remember correctly, this one started that researchers from this and this, they joined together and started. So exactly the same example that you gave before.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. That is, I think they could have very easily turned it around. Like, for example, a plant reactions to rain is close to one of panic, comma, according to an international team of scientists involving blah, 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 blah. Okay. So in general, I think this is a good press release, but this specific aspect is not that good. So I agree with you. Another comment?
That's a question. Where are we sharing our thoughts on the article? So that's something that we have already addressed. And another comment is the quotes are good.
Yep. whether the quotes are good or not, you mean?
Well,
I mean, is the comment stating that the quote?
There is no question mark, so probably it's a comment. But you can comment further on that, of course.
Yeah, okay. I'm very happy because you are focusing on some of the aspects that are important to observe. So some of in my opinion, some of the quotes are good, others no. So for example, the first quote, this one that when MYC2 is activated, thousands of genes, blah, 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 this could be very easily translated into plain text, okay? Or for example, yeah, okay, so this quote here. But for example, the other one, the one that say, as to why plant would need to panic when it rains, strange as it sounds, rain is actually the leading cause for disease spreading between plants, okay? I think this quote is much, much better, and it's the one I would keep in the press release because it conveys interpretation, it is lively, okay? There is this thought of, you know, strange as it sounds. So it's really curious that, I mean, for a lay person, it's curious that rain can bring something dangerous, let's say, let's say in quotes for plants, etc. So that is a good one. But the other one I think could be easily be translated into plain text, unless, which is a possibility, it is really used for that other aesthetic purpose, because the author of the press release maybe felt that there was too much plain text. There are 1, 2, 3 paragraphs of plain text, and he or she felt that introducing a quote would break down and would, let's say, boost the attention of the reader. Okay. Are there other comments?
In fact, there is another comment on quotes, that is, I think there are too many quotes. I don't know if there could be too many quotes, Michele.
For my taste, yes. For my taste, yes. That is, in general, I think there are too many of them. And really, for example, in the end, when there are, you know, 3 paragraphs, one after another with quotes, I would have substituted them, replaced them with normal paragraphs, because if you accumulate too many of them, you really lose power, okay? You lose the special power of quotes. But maybe let's go to the basic questions. What do you think about newsworthiness? Is this a novel fact? Is this something that is an actual news from your point of view? Maybe since there are many of you out there, I would ask you one that thinks yes and one that thinks no, just to quickly write down why they think yes or no.
Until we get those, there is another comment here about the first sentence being a bit too dry in the beginning, perhaps. And there is another one. I find it's too much information on different topics mixed, from rain to panic to signaling and back. So maybe they're judging that it's a bit confusing.
So, yeah, okay. Regarding the first sentence, I think I understand what this person means, which is, you know, there is no literary metaphor there, nothing that is, you know, an anecdote or something with which you would start, for example, a feature in a newspaper. But we have to bear in mind that this is a press release. This is not the newspaper article. So definitely this is something that makes a difference in the style, okay? So it's good that the sentence is factual. And let's say the challenge is making it attractive and factual at the same time. I think in this case, they have managed to do it because the sentence, the simple sentence, a plant reaction to rain is close to one of panic, at least from my point of view, is very effective, okay? It is clearly using a metaphor, the metaphor of panic, to convey a scientific idea. So I wouldn't agree with the opinion that it is too dry, okay? And regarding the accumulation of facts, I think that some of the details, for example, the activation of MYC2, these could have been left for lower in the press release. But in general, I don't feel there is, sort of an excess of facts. It is clear that the author or authors of the press release bet on one key idea, which is the idea of panic, okay? This metaphor of panic. So any answer regarding the novelty of the story? No? Okay, so no. I will comment myself. Based on what we see from the press release, it is perfectly justified, because here the news is basically that a new paper is out, okay, with this finding. So based on this, one would say that it is a news. Then in the following exercise, which is a different press release on the same topic, we will see that there may be some nuance to this idea. But anyway, regarding the importance, is it important? Does anybody have any remark? This does not seem to be anything that has an application. It's not something that, is related to any topic being discussed in the public sphere. Do you see in which way this story is sort of important, relevant for a broad readership, or at least relevant enough to convince a journalist to write about it? Any comment on that? Or any incoming comment while you think about it?
Not yet, but if I may, I can answer myself. Please. Maybe. I don't think this. I don't think from the general public perspective, this might be an important finding. Probably. I don't know. I might be biased.
Yeah, I know, but I partially disagree, because, as I said before, for example, if you try to answer the other question, the question, so what? It's really, well, I mean, now I know this fact, and what does it imply? Is it possible to use it in, caring for your plants in the balcony, or improving agriculture, etc.? There is no clear answer to this, although one could dig down in the story and find possible applications, which it's a pity that this press release has not highlighted. But I think that here there is a key element of relevance, which is pure and simple curiosity, okay? So as I said before, plants is something we are very familiar with. Many of us love plants. Many of us, like me, for example, ask themselves why they are a serial killer of plants, and all these sort of things. So it's really sheer curiosity. The simple idea that plants can experience something similar to panic, and moreover, when something that we usually associate with something positive for plants, which is raining, okay, or being in contact with water, I think it's really, it really drives some sort of curiosity. So this is, I think, the typical scientific results that one would say in principle, so-and-so, I'm not sure whether I would write a press release about it or not, but they have managed to find a metaphor that suddenly makes it curious, okay? So, I mean, probably it will not make to the front page, but it could make to some sort of, I don't know if you agree. I mean, Isabel, you are probably even better qualified to comment on that.
Yeah, I think in this particular press release, I think the headline is marvelous. It's a great headline, and it speaks to your curiosity, how a plant could panic from anything, and specifically from rain, which, as you pointed out, it's something that you relate to, something that it's good for a plant. So, and then afterwards, I mean, it doesn't from my point of view, it doesn't really matter what in the rest of the text is written, but because I will be already hooked up by the headline.
Absolutely. I mean, you have made a perfect analysis from my point of view. I completely agree. Okay, fine. So since we are running out of time, maybe let's go through some of the more detailed aspects like headlines, subheads, and lead. Once again, I encourage you to make any comment. If you have doubts or you don't agree with what you say, just write it down and we will discuss it. So the I mean, the lead is quite good because it contains the date and the main topic and who is in charge of the things, etc. There is this problem that was the first highlighted thing, that it could have been built in another way to give the credit to the researchers without starting with a long list of institution names. Regarding the structure, in general, it applies this inverted pyramid principle because it starts with the results, okay? It starts with the results, and it starts also with a very generic way of offering the results, okay? The specific of the results, how the experiments was done, the detailed circuitry that is involved in it is left for later once the attention of the public has been grabbed by this very broad explanation, okay? And also the structure, the broad structure, not only in the beginning, but also the broad structure of the press release is quite ordered. So it starts with the results, it provides the interpretation, and then it goes to the methods and the process. So one could have told it in another way, but it's very clear. They have chosen a structure and that's it. So regarding sentences and words, I think here the key success of the authors of the press release was using this comparison with human panic. So when I said, okay, when you have a complex concept, try to find a metaphor, an anecdote, an example that allows you to break down this concept. This is a key example of how to do it and how to do it in a reasonable way without, let's say, droning into a metaphor that doesn't make any sense and that conveys a wrong message, etc. Here they are able to draw your attention with this panic metaphor, and then they explain what they mean, okay? So they are not, let's say, misleading the reader, okay? Maybe the structure of the sentences could be improved. So for example, there is this sentence that say, UWA Professor Harvey Miller said, after spraying plant with water and observing the effect, the researchers noticed a chain reaction in the plants caused by a protein called MYC2. Okay, so this is a very long and complicated sentence, and it could have been told in a very plain way, like, you know, researchers sprayed plant with waters. They observed the effect and they noticed the chain reaction, okay? So this is the typical thing that you write down and then you can rewrite after reading it in a way that it's much plainer, and that moreover allows the reader to sort of create a movie in their mind of what happened, okay? If it were written like I said, you would imagine, you know, the researchers spraying the plant and then observing and then studying the signals, etc. Okay? There are some passives here and there. And then, for example, they could easily have avoided the word surprising in the lead, okay? You don't need to say that something like this is surprising. It's surprising in itself, okay? Okay, so we have finished our time for the first press release, but if there is any additional comment, doubt, disagreement. Any comment coming in?
Not right now. There's nothing coming in. We should,
okay.
But the channels are open. So whenever anyone decides to send us a comment, we can just drop everything else and address it.
Okay, so now, thanks to a very brilliant idea by Isabel, now we will submit to you a press release, another press release by another institution, and exactly the same finding. But one can easily test using simple metrics of, for example, number of articles that were triggered by the press release, that this one triggered much less articles than the one you have analyzed now, okay? So now I share the screen so that you can see it and that we make sure that you read the same one we're talking about. It's this one. So you remember the other one was about plants panicking, and now you have impact of water droplets on leaves quickly triggers stress responses in plants. So 10 minutes to read it, up to 16:13 in Central European time from now, and then we do the same. So we comment and analyze, etc.
Okay, I'm sharing the question in the Q&A, but I don't know if it's appearing in any ways. I have shared it already on Twitter.
You mean the link, right?
The link to the second.
So 3 minutes left, and then we go to the discussion.
Yes. Michele, I will need to jump off at 55, 5 to 5. So 5 minutes earlier.
Okay, so yeah, no problem.
For the next session.
No problem. Okay, so let's start the discussion. Are there any comments coming in?
Not yet.
Okay, so maybe let me ask a question. We have told you the story, okay? So the story is the same paper, 2 different press releases. One triggers many follow-up stories, and this one, the other one, and this one triggers much less, okay? So what is the key difference in your opinion?
Let's see if we get some comments. But if I may, I will.
If you are shy, okay, please. But don't spoil. Don't do a spoiler.
Yeah. So I won't spoil anything. I will go back to the headline again, just by comparing, because in the case of press releases or in the case of news stories in the newspaper in general, many times the people just read the title, the headline, and that's what they get home. And then when comparing these 2 stories that are actually about the same paper, one is very engaging, the why plants panic when it rains, and the other one is very factual. I mean, it's a lot more descriptive of what happens from the researcher's point of view, but much less engaging. Also, they talk about exactly the same. So that would be the first thing that hits me.
In fact, one can make an exercise and one can really translate one title into the other, okay? So for the example, impact of water droplet on leaves, okay? Isn't that a description of what happened when it rains, okay? So there may be impact of water droplet on leaves in other situations that is not raining, but it's not a major misleading action to translate this with rain. And the other thing is stress responses. Okay, so here I admit that let's say, picking the metaphor of panic was not obvious, and that was the talent of the previous press release, but still one could have used a less technical language, okay? So simply stress maybe, and not necessarily stress responses, which is sounds like a bit more geeky, okay? Yeah. So I think that is a key aspect of the yeah.
Yeah, in fact, here Ross makes a key point. Do you think that the general public know what it means by stress in the case of plants? By linking this stress in plants, what it means to stress among human beings? Michele?
Yeah. Sorry, there was a little delay. No, I don't think the general public knows, because even scientists in other fields don't know what stress in plants is, okay? So, I mean, it's almost obliged to find some sort of metaphor if you really want to convey this message to the public, okay? If you really think that it's worth for the public to hear about this message, okay? Yeah. And
I mean, there are a couple of comments coming.
Okay.
First one is, I'm sorry. The first one is, it's not a novel fact, but provides more insights, adds infos about potential consequences in terms of plant development, and draws a conclusion. I think they are talking about the second press release. And then there is another comment. I haven't seen the first story, but this one seems just to be describing the research.
Yeah, I mean, okay, let me address first of all the second one. The problem is not that the press release is only or just describing the research. That is precisely what a press release must do, okay? The problem is how you describe it, okay? So it's not that you need to create a feature and find a story and invent anything that is beyond the description of the finding, but you have to do it in such a way that it is understandable, compelling, and it sort of stands out in the middle of a tsunami of other information. So that is one point. And then I think the other member of the audience was pointing out a very interesting thing. There is one single thing that I believe it's better in this press release with respect to the other. That is that it is more honest with respect to the novel nature of the finding, okay? Because it clearly states that the study confirms the results of previous research. So here there is something that is more in the ethical realm rather than in the realm of the efficacy of writing, okay? And the thing that I want to say with respect to this is that what the other press office has done is selling as a completely new story something that was not that new, something on which the evidence was already available, okay? And this is a bit dishonest because two things can happen. If the journalist is clever, he or she discovers after 15 minutes talking with the scientist this fact, and he or she will get very angry because he or she will say, I mean, you have sold me as something new, a story that had already been found maybe 1 year or 2 years before. I've sold it to my editor. Now maybe there is a page ready to be filled in, and I found out, I discovered that maybe, you know, the New York Times has written about it 2 years ago, okay? So that will make him or her very angry. Or the other possible thing is that the journalist doesn't discover it and publishes the story, but then, you know, you can, maybe somebody on social networks say, okay, this is not very new, and the story doesn't make a splash for all these reasons, and then there is this feeling of lack of trust. And I think that a very important thing in the relation between journalists and press officers is that you can trust press officers, is that they really, if they contact you with a story, it's really because they believe that it's important, that it's new, and that it's suitable for the sort of things you write. Otherwise, next time the press officer comes to you with a story, you will immediately be suspicious because you will think, okay, last time he or she sold me a story that it was not really new, okay? So that is, I mean, on the one hand, one would say that the other press release was more effective by omitting this fact. But on the other hand, this one is better in ethical terms and in terms of building trust that then is effective in the long run. So, but, I mean, there is one detail. Yeah, please comment.
No, a question coming in. Do you think it is important not to exaggerate too much then?
Absolutely, it's vital. There is always a temptation in institutions and in press offices, etc., to hype findings and think, you know, this time I've managed to put it in the newspaper and this is a success and I will repeat this again and again and again. But this is dangerous in the long run for the institution itself, because it will create in the journalists and in the public as well a sensation of suspicion, okay? So once you have sold a story, you know, once you have sold the cure of cancer and cancer has not been cured, next time that you sell something, even an important finding, there will be a lot of suspicion with respect to what you say. So I think that this is really a key element. I've not entered too much in it because this is a very applied workshop, but in terms of communication strategy, everything would be much better if on all sides, both on sides of press officers and on the side of journalists, there would be a commitment to reduce hype and to really stick to what are the important findings, which does not mean, you know, being boring or being pessimist or whatever. It means really try to be, I mean, it means treating the readers as adults, not as people that must be told false stories, okay? But anyway, there is one very important thing that I would like, and I hope one of you will have noticed, that is also, I mean, in general, this second press release is a bit of a failure as compared to the other one. In terms of the strategy, it's too complex. For example, one thing that is clear for me is that the structure of the press release is very wrong in terms of, you know, putting on top of the press release a lot of technical topics. But there is one other thing in which that had a very strong potential that they mentioned and that could have been exploited in terms of communication. And I was wondering whether any of you had seen it. A piece of information that is not there in the other press release. Any idea from the public?
Let's see if the public says something. From my side.
Otherwise, I can give.
From my side, I could say that I like better the images, because you haven't said, we are talking about writing the press releases and we are not talking about the images that come together with the press releases, that they are also a selling point for them. I mean this with quotations. I prefer the image that accompanies the second press release. But I think you were not referring to this.
I agree. No, I was not referring to this. No, but I agree that the second image, the image of the second press release is much better, it's much professional, and it is definitely an important aspect, because not always newspapers have the possibility to send a photographer, even if that should be the rule, but sometimes they need images. So definitely having good images is a very important thing. This is also an important thing for scientists to know, because sometimes you interview scientists and you tell them, okay, can you send me high quality images of your work, of your lab, of you, or your finding, etc. And they send you, no, this very small picture filled with notes and text written in, Arial or whatever, and that is useless for a newspaper. So when you get asked this question, please try to find a high quality, nice image that you would be drawn into if you were a reader of a newspaper. But I was referring to something else. So one of the key aspects of newsworthiness is, okay, so whether it's novel, and we have discussed about it, whether it's important, here I see a major mistake, which is that the language that they use is so complex that probably they are thinking about a public that is already an expert in the field. And so this explains part of the failure, because this is a press release targeted to a general public. But then there is this question of so what, okay, of applications, of what does this finding imply? Here, okay, so now I do the spoiler. There is a very interesting thing that is left for the end, in which one of the authors say, we are currently studying an old Japanese agricultural technique that is based on treading down grains during the growth phase to achieve more abundant crop production. Oh my God. I mean, you have this very beautiful story, an ancient Japanese technique that is related to your finding, that shows that your finding may be useful. Why on earth have you not put this up in your press release? This could have even been a possible title, okay? So why shaking plants affect their productivity? You could have you could have framed the story in a different way, completely unrelated to rain and panic, but related to this possible potential application, okay? Yeah. So once again, the material was there, but unfortunately they've put it down in the press release and they have not taken advantage of that. Okay.
Yeah, I must say that Jenny Ryokuta, sorry for butchering your name, already sent that comment. Just when you were starting to commenting on this, we got the answer. So well done, Jenny.
Okay, so sorry for. Well done, Jenny. Yeah, and definitely that is a thread that could have been used to make the story more impactful. Always without misleading. I mean, you're not claiming that this is the solution to any agricultural problem, etc. But you're showing, okay, this is not just, just a curiosity. It's something that it may have potential implications. Okay. Okay, so I don't have any other major comment. So unless there are other questions from the public, we can go to the third and last exercise. And maybe before Isabel leaves, which means basically before we end, maybe there will also be time for a round of last questions, comments, or remarks on the broad topic. Okay, so we go to the next one.
Yes, I'm about to share it. So you will be able to find it in the Q&A box in a couple of seconds, or maybe it's already available there. Yeah, now it's there, and I will share. I will share it in Twitter as well.
Okay, there was a comment by somebody saying how much of this type of difference could be cultural, Sweden versus Australia. I had not thought, in fact, about cultural differences. I think in science communication, in what we call the global north, which would include Australia, even if it's not physically north, the culture is quite shared, and it's dominated by, English-speaking reporting. Okay, so in the rest of the world, there are a lot of other different ways of approaching things, etc., that are very valuable and that bring in very new things. But I would say between Sweden and Australia, I would not say there is a big difference. There may be, rather than a cultural difference, an institutional cultural difference, okay? So a difference in the culture of the institutions where they are. So not, a national difference, but a difference that may happen within Australia and within Sweden That is, whether the institution, for example, has a strong push towards selling their stories or not, which may even degenerate into a push towards overhyping or not. So for example, the fact that in one of the press releases, they really did not include the fact that it was something that had already been published before, and it was just a confirmation, that gives me a clue that it may be in an institution in which the culture, it may come from an institution in which the culture is a bit more inclined toward hype, okay? So I would say not that much a cultural difference, but a difference in the institutional culture, okay? Okay, so let's go to the next one, genetic patterns associated with plant immunity. And we have time, let's say up to, now I give you 9 minutes, up to 16:40 in Central European time. And then we do the last discussion, and maybe there's time for a last round of questions.
Perfect.
Sorry. 3 minutes left.
I want to remind everyone that you can send us your questions through the Q&A whenever you see fit. So there is no limitations there.
Great. Okay, so let's discuss this press release. Any visceral reaction from the public? Otherwise, I have one.
Not yet.
Okay, so what do you think of a sentence like, let me, I wrote down the quote, like misregulating immune receptors to trigger autoimmunity, or for example, it allows the researcher to identify single nucleotide polymorphisms which mark the causal natural variation in the genome responsible for growth immunity trade-off. I mean, are you crazy? I mean, that is my visceral reaction. That is, how dare you write such a sentence in a press release, okay? I mean, I think I can understand this content on a technical publication, okay? So for example, in a newsletter that is triggered to the very specialized public, etc. But even in that content, I think that there is a lot of, let's say, mental translation that is required to read through these sentences, okay? Even by experts that probably would resort to this sort of press release to get the gist of a finding. Otherwise, they would go directly to the abstract of the paper, okay? So I can see, I mean, clearly this is not a press release targeted to the layperson, not a press release targeted to a journalist, not even a journalist that writes on a specialized outlet. I'm, you know, one on the scientist, for example, one on which usually people is very savvy about biology, etc. It may be suited for a publication that goes directly to experts. But even in that case, I would make things simpler. I would make the life of the reader simpler, okay? Anyway, what about you? I mean, you are in the field and maybe you think that I'm being too naive or too, you know, oversimplifying things.
I mean, from my point of view, I think it's I agree with you. It's very technical, but I thought that this was a good point that they actually begin with the results, with their findings, with their actual findings. It's actually the first question, the first sentence before, and then they make a small introduction why it might be important. And but yeah, I agree. There is a lot of technical information, too much jargon, and it's I 100% agree with you. Probably the people, the addressees are other scientists and not necessarily the general public. Yeah, I see people
but
agreeing. There are some people agreeing.
Yeah,
apparently.
and also, I mean, I understand what you say. I mean, they focus on the finding in the title and in the subhead. But for example, there is something strange in how it is structured, because the whole initial paragraph provides background, okay? And then it goes back. So this paragraph that says genomic information from plants can be used to enhance agricultural production, blah, 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 blah. And then you have 6 lines, and then a research team led by Professor blah, blah, blah finds. So that is something that one should do only if the background information is really crucial to understand what's next, okay? But in this case, I think I can see why they do it, because they want to motivate the reader, but you have to motivate the reader with the finding, not with some background thing. Anyway, I did an exercise myself that I want to share with you, which was, okay, what alternative headline would I have written, okay? And because, you know, I think that that this headline, genetic patterns associated with plant immunity, is the typical headline that if you reread it again and again and again, you would find ways to break it down to simpler ideas, okay? So for example, one alternative that I proposed is the following. Researchers find so my proposal is the following. Researchers find genetic hint of why some cross plants self-destroy, okay? That is my proposal. What do you think? Is it something that you would accept? Is it accurate, or is it, am I pushing the things too far? So instead of genetic pattern, I repeat it. Researchers find genetic hint of why some crossed plants self-destroy, okay? So
genetic key, the key.
Genetic hint, a hint, like a clue, okay? Yeah. So instead of saying genetic pattern, which sounds like a bit geeky, I use a clue, a genetic clue, so a clue in the genes. And instead of saying plant immunity, which is very generic, I refer to this phenomenon that they mention about, that they talk about, which is an autoimmune response that can even kill the plant, okay? And so I connect this genetic hint to self-destruction, and not on whatever plant, but on a specific subset that are these crossed plants that they mention. I think, I mean, it's not, you know, a killer headline, but I think at least it makes things clearer, and it evokes something that people may have some familiarity with, like, for example, cross plants, etc. What do you think, Isabel? Would you approve it, or?
Yeah, I would approve it. It's longer than this one, and I'm always go for shorter headlines if possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's more appealing. Maybe we could even, because I don't know. I haven't read the paper, so I don't know if you could make the comparison. Maybe you could make the comparison between something like apoptosis find in plants, I think like that. Because
Yeah. Yeah, for example, one way of cutting it down would be removing the researcher's find, okay? So one could turning it around like, you know, self-destruction of cross plants has
been identified.
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, something like this. But anyway, any comments flowing in? Because otherwise I would leave the last 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ines Modesto shares the proposed title would catch my attention. The actual title does not. And to be honest, I would read beyond the title. Probably she meant I would not read beyond the title. With the one that is okay, but right now available.
Yeah.
So Ines prefers your version of it.
Okay. Any other remark? Otherwise, I tell you some of the notes I took on this. Okay, as I said, I think the major failure is giving the wrong answer to this question of, is it important for my readership? Okay, so given that this in principle is something addressed to lay people and journalists, this has been answered in a wrong way, if that is the case, unless, I mean, it was a press release targeted to a really specialized public, which is not usual. And then, for example, there is this whole issue of hybrid necrosis, okay, which seems to be something that may affect, I mean, I'm not an expert in the field, but I get from the press release that it may affect things that are familiar with people. For example, at one point they mentioned broccoli and some familiar plants, etc. So why not being more explicit about that? Why not being more explicit about how this whole finding could be useful for a problem that happens in real plants that people find in their everyday life, okay? That is a thread that I would have used. Okay, we have discussed the headline.
Would you, Michele, would you recommend to people working on plans to go for the curiosity side of their science stories more than to the importance for the general public? Because we see always a lack of plant science stories on the general media in comparison with other science-related themes. So maybe we could limp onto the curiosity in order to write them more than to the importance of the actual funding for the general public.
Yeah, I had a slide precisely on that, because I think that there are both strong sides and weak sides in plant science. But while I reopen the PowerPoint to find that slide, because I have written all it there, I would say that definitely curiosity is a big tool, I think, in your discipline for the things you have said before. So I would encourage you to use it, okay? I mean, people really love plants, etc. But I think that as problems like, you know, climate change, but also, for example, advance, but also, for example, as the awareness of people about, you know, the importance, for example, of plant-based diet, on land management, these whole topics that, you know, traditionally in, you know, urban culture has been forgotten for a lot of time and has been considered, you know, like something that is related to, you know, something alien to everyday life. These things are becoming more and more central. So I would not leave the utility part, let's say, completely, and rely only on curiosity for the plants that you have on your balcony, because I think more and more there are issues related with that utility part that are of broad interest, okay? So, I mean, and so let me see if I find that transparent, because on the other hand, there are also challenges. So for example, some obvious challenges are all the things related to technological manipulation of plants, like GMOs, etc., which are always very, very, very extremely sensitive. But, you know, just to give you an example, the role of plants for carbon capture, for example, and how technology could enhance that role is certainly something that is very important. Okay, here I found it. Okay, so if there's time, I quickly share the screen. Here it is. So I see clear opportunities in terms of everything that is related to food, climate change, fighting plagues, innovation in agriculture, you know, agriculture seen or framed as something that is not only tradition, it's also something that can be high technology, etc. And all the presence of plants in culture and society. I mean, imagine that one of the most interesting books in Spain in the last few years have been a book by a gardener who wrote about the plants in the pictures of El Prado Museum, okay? And there is a lot of science there, okay? The challenges, of course, everything that is related to pesticides, environmental impact, GMOs, also sometimes very naive and detached image of what real agriculture is, and also all the injustice, because, you know, when we talk about the use of plants that we make in society, the commercial use of plants, etc., we cannot separate it from how, you know, the market is structured and how jobs are distributed in the world. It's not only a scientific topic, of course, it's also yeah. But maybe let me check whether I have here, because I had a lot of examples. Yeah, I mean, these are in Spanish, unfortunately, but for, you know, there is this very interesting story on quinoa that was published in El Mundo. This is a journalism project on the basic staple foods, sugar, cocoa, bananas, coffee, and African palm. There is missing food, the story on how food is lost in the food chain. And many other stories, you know. Here I have some that are mine. It's about this, I don't know, I can't remember the name in English, but it's about these autochthonous plants of Africa. There are like 200 plants that are autochthonous of Africa and that they are not staple crops, and but have a very strong potential of climate adaptation, etc. So, you know, I mean, there are many, you know, pollinizers, cocoa and genetics, you know, there are many things that can be, you know, here you have plants and culture, many things that can be exploited to make, all these things appealing to the public.
Yeah, I think the audience will 100% agree that the plants are awesome. Because they're really a passionate audience on plants right here with us. I'm sorry, but we have
maybe
to.
Just one last remark.
Yes.
Yeah, just one last remark. Physicists, I'm a physicist. They have managed to make appealing the Higgs boson. Okay, so making plants appealing must not be too difficult. Okay.
Okay, that's a very fair point. So thank you so much, Michele, for sharing this time with us and for enlightening us with your skills and how to be better at communication as a scientist, and and for giving us these insights on communication. And I will be happy to repeat it sometime in the future. And I don't know. I think we don't have any comments. And we have really to jump off both, Rosa and I. So bye-bye, Michele. Bye-bye, everyone. We will be waiting for you in the next session for the policy session that we host, the Global Plan Council host together with EPSO. So that will begin in 3 minutes. So bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.